What's up, War Rapport family? We are back with another great edition of Building Rapport. Today, we have a special guest for you guys. Joining us today is sideline reporter for ESPN and AL.com contributor, Lauren Sisler. Lauren, thanks for joining us.
Yes, so great to be with you guys. I appreciate it. Always fun to catch up and I guess get to know you guys and obviously the listeners and the viewers out there.
I wanted to kick our talk off by talking a little bit about Bryan Harsin's first year on the Plains in review. Now, you've had a chance to kind of look at where the program was under our last coach, where it is under this coach. You know, how do you rate this first year for Bryan Harsin down in Auburn?
Yeah, I think for Auburn, obviously coming in to this season, there was a lot of unknowns for this Auburn football team. And, I think the one thing that the hope was when you hire a guy like Bryan Harsin, who comes over from Boise State with the success that he had, is you're looking for consistency, right? You're looking for consistency because I think that was something that was perhaps lacking at Auburn in the last several years, where you kind of have this up and down roller coaster. And we all know that's what it is. Being a fan of any school, most any school out there's always going to be that emotional roller coaster that you're going to have to jump on and you're going to have to buckle up and you're going to have to hold on for the ride of your life, right? So I think that the thought there was bring in Coach Harsin. He's got a proven track record of consistency. Competing at a very high level in the Mountain West Conference there in Boise. And, I think you bring him over and you hope that he can develop this program, right? And you have to give, I think, a little bit of leeway for someone that comes in. He's new to the program. He's new to the SEC. He's new to what football is like here in the South. And I know a lot of people were concerned about his West Coast ties, kind of having that West Coast buy-in, and maybe he wouldn't be quite the fit that they were looking for here at Auburn. But I think you give him the benefit of the doubt and the fact that you got to bring the recruiting on. There's a lot of things to navigate. You're coming off a pandemic season in 2020, and then the pandemic continues. And so you're having to navigate some of those things. And while we didn't see a lot of the pauses that we saw in 2020, there were still a lot of things to kind of manage there. And in the recruiting scene, that was one of the bigger things that I know coaches talked about in the 2020 season, that really it was kind of like, they were called Zoom babies. That's what they called these guys, Zoom babies, because these players are coming on campus and are not coming on campus and basically committing to a school via Zoom. And so you got to think that those guys in 2020 and obviously the recruiting classes, there's been a residual effect from all of that, whether it was under Coach Harsin or the previous coach and Gus Malzahn. And so, I think the expectations were obviously certainly higher and maybe not met in Coach Harsin's first season. I think they were off to a fairly strong start. I think in that, of course, Penn State game, you sort of get that sampling of what this Auburn team could be all about. But one thing I saw from that really kind of stood out to me is that there were no moral victories. And in going into that game, it was sort of like, okay, we had a chance to win that. And we didn't even really show up and show out and play that great. We didn't play our best football. We left there was a lot left to be desired. And Harsin wasn't okay with that. So I really think that he kind of set the tone and set the stage for what his expectations were for this football team. Did they deliver on it? Did he as a coach, him and his coaching staff deliver on that throughout the season? I think everyone would answer that question with, maybe not what they had hoped for. And, certainly we kind of saw that throughout the season, the up and down roller coaster, the opportunity to close things out. You're ahead, in the Mississippi State game, you have a chance to kind of close the book on that. And then things didn't happen there. And then you go on this 4-game losing streak. Obviously, the meltdown against Mississippi State, as I mentioned, you have the loss to South Carolina. Of course, the Alabama game, you have them on the hook. You're literally playing lights out defense. You're keeping them out of the end zone. And then next thing you know, you take it into overtime. You can't close the deal. That would have been a huge notch on Bryan Harsin's cap coming in first year, beating Alabama, which is now, of course, the runner-up to the national championship. But with that being said, I think that the expectations are always going to be high at Auburn. I've been now covering Auburn for a decade, and I see that and I understand that. The expectations are always going to be high, especially when you're in the SEC West. You're competing against teams like Alabama that are just up the road, and you want to be able to compete for a championship not once every decade, but year in and year out. And I certainly think they fell short of that this year. lot left to be desired. And so I think year 2 will be a very important year for Coach Harsin and the Auburn Tigers.
Yeah, Lauren, you mentioned the high expectations that Auburn fans have and how last year ended. Auburn ended the season 6-7, 5-game losing streak. And the last time we've had coaches that have ended a season with a losing record, they didn't see the next season. And so Auburn fans are have strong feelings about finishing a season in that regard. So in your opinion, what do you think the sense of urgency is with Bryan Harsin going into year 2 with the coaching staff he has put together and the players that he's assembling to right the ship and at least in 2022 show that Auburn is heading in the right direction?
Seems to be a lot of 2s in there, right? 2022, year 2. I think year 2 is going to be the year, and it's going to need to be the year for Coach Harsin and the Auburn Tigers, as I mentioned. And, I think you have to start with the recruiting class. Getting that number 13 ranking nationally is certainly a big one. You have some key guys that are coming into this class. I think recruiting is obviously a big deal, right? That is a huge component to all of this. So you have to have a little bit of promise there. Obviously, going into the Birmingham Bowl, that's not the way you want to end a season. And certainly when you turn the page over like that would have been a very instrumental game, in my opinion, to at least give some hope. And again, we're not talking about moral victories, and nobody really cared that much about the Birmingham Bowl. And it's like, oh, here we go again. Auburn's in the Birmingham Bowl, right? But at the end of the day, I think that still a win is a win. And as you're, like you said, assembling this team, this coaching staff, what it's going to look like, under the new regime, so to speak, and some of the changes that Harsin has made, I think it is important to kind of have that momentum and being able to build on that and to help with recruiting, right? And so, I think that this is going to be a very important year. And I think the expectations will continue to rise. I think that, a 6-win season isn't going to cut it. I really don't think a 7 or 8-win season is going to cut it. I think, at the end of the day, I think that, if you can't get into that, 8 to 9 to 10 range win season and also have an opportunity to knock off a team like Georgia and or Alabama when all is said and done, then you're kind of falling short of expectations. But I do think that the pieces are starting to move into place. I think, again, I always like to give coaches the benefit of the doubt, especially when they come in. You're dealing with a lot of the outside distractions and the outside noise that comes with obviously being a new coach, not being familiar with this territory, so to speak. And then, how good are you at recruiting guys, right? And I think that Auburn showed with this recruiting class that they're able to recruit guys, especially in their backyard, right here in the state of Alabama, I think is an important thing. And it seems like Harsin it has a very big respect for that. And as someone that's not from here, he still understands the importance of that and bringing guys in that are local kids, that are state kids that can really do that. And then I think also you got to look at what he was able to do and bringing in a couple of the key targets that they had in the JUCO level. I think that's important. And then, of course, how are you going to utilize that transfer portal? And of course, that is an ever so ongoing evolution of things. But I think you have to be optimistic about that. And then you get guys like Texas A&M transfer Zach Calzada that comes over. I covered Texas A&M spring game in 2021. And, it was interesting to me getting a guy like him. Honestly, it came as a bit of a shock to me. I think, Bo Nix leaves for Oregon. I think you guys, I know that you've given your take so far on that, but joining the conversation, what does that look like? And then you have TJ Finley, and then of course Texas A&M transfer Zach Calzada. And I'll be honest with you, in watching him as a quarterback and what he was able to do for Texas A&M, it wasn't always pretty, but when he was going up against Haynes King, who ended up ultimately getting the starting job before becoming injured, I was pretty impressed with the young man. I was pretty impressed with his abilities. I think he was still obviously raw, still a lot of things to figure out there. But, Bryan Harsin's known to develop quarterbacks. I think he did that with Bo Nix. I think that was something we saw at times throughout the college football season this past year with Bo Nix. I think there's some promise there. And so I do think that if Bryan Harsin can get his hands on these quarterbacks and start to develop them as the leader and the core of your football team and kind of develop your offense around that, I think that will be really significant for him here in year 2.
Lauren, you mentioned the portal. So I want to dig into the transfer portal a little bit because you've covered multiple schools as well as Auburn. Can you talk a little bit about what coaches are saying about how the transfer portal has changed recruiting and what dynamic that adds to college football?
I mean, I'll tell you what, it's so interesting because so this college football season, I covered 19 games. So that was sort of my assignment. And every week we get our assignment on Sunday. I never did have an Auburn game this year, unfortunately. I was hoping that I'd snag one, but unfortunately I didn't. However, I did get a UCF game at the end of the season there with Gus Malzahn. So I got to kind of cover him on his trails there to Florida. But, it's interesting because every coach kind of has a different take. And a lot of times, I will say it was a topic of conversation almost in every single call that we had with coaches. Every time we sat down with the coach, it almost always came up. What does the transfer portal mean to you? How is this changing the landscape of college football? And I will say, and I use this as probably my most recent example and something that really resonated with me. So I had the Peach Bowl. I did radio for ESPN on the Peach Bowl, Pittsburgh and Michigan State, and we had Mel Tucker. And, one thing that he said, and obviously he's cut from the same cloth here in the SEC, and, he understands what it means to compete at this level in the SEC, and just talking about the transfer portal and how it has just changed the landscape of things. You're really having to coach guys differently and handle and manage guys differently, right? So it's not just, okay, like, let me make this kid happy. Let's see if he's happy. Let's check in with him at the end of the year and see how things are going, right? No, we're talking about like you're having to do like an inventory and a check on these guys week in and week out because, oh, by the way, we're not talking about season kicks off week 1. Okay, week 2, week 3, week 4. Oh, by the way, I can jump in the transfer portal, hop into the transfer portal, and we'll see you week 4. And so he said it's really as a coach, you're in a different world now of having to really sit guys down and have those conversations with them and really pull it out of them. Like, are you happy? What are you feeling? How are you feeling right now? And you're dealing with all the outside noise, right? Who over here might give me a better opportunity? Who might have an NIL deal that I can go sign, right? What are the parents saying? What are the people on the outside? The other people that are attached to that coach or to that player saying about all of this, right? And so, he said it really has created a different way and a different approach to coaching. And I think that's where people have started to see. And I know Nick Saban has been one of the prime examples as things have sort of laid out throughout the season of how maybe he's coaching a little bit differently. And he seems to have a different personality than maybe we're used to seeing Nick Saban having because of the way he's having to coach guys. I think he was used as one prime example. And we've heard that from a lot of other coaches, their personalities kind of having to dictate with the new evolution and the new wave of how these athletes want to be coached, and really coddling them in some ways and making sure that they're happy, because at the end of the day, if someone's not playing or getting the opportunity that they want, they can just jump right in the transfer portal and take their opportunity somewhere else. And I don't really necessarily want to jump in and say I'm totally against the transfer portal, because at the end of the day, if there is a bigger or better opportunity somewhere else, but I think you have to do it with class. And I think that there is some parameters that should be set around that, because I think sometimes these kids, it's always the thought process of like grass is greener on the other side. But, oh, by the way, they get to the other side and realize, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe it wasn't all too bad. And then, I mean, you've seen it. Like, how many of there's been guys recently jumping on and saying, well, I'm going to enter the transfer portal, but I may not actually leave. What does that tell you, right? What does that tell you about, the school that they're at? And if you're a coach of a team that's got your quarterback or whomever it is that's saying, I'm going to leave, but it's like almost like the nudge of, hey, well, what can you do for me what can you do to sell me to stay here, right? And so it just, I can only imagine that creates a level of the competition, not even on the outside, but even inside the locker room. And how does that affect the chemistry inside the locker room when you got guys that are talking about like, hey, if things don't change, I'm out of here. Well, I mean, that's got to hurt to me, the rapport in the locker room, right? We're talking about rapport here on the show. That's just
Right.
kind of my opinion about it. So it's a tough world. And I think a lot of things are changing. It's an evolution. And I think a lot of things will be learned. And I think maybe some adjustments will eventually have to be made.
So, Lauren, we talked about recruiting. We talked about what Auburn has to do to improve in year 2. Let's talk about the division that Auburn currently resides in. Auburn has one of the toughest schedules, and it's a tough job because no matter who they play in terms of non-conference opponents, they have the SEC West, and they're always going to have Bama and Georgia on their schedule, which, of course, by the way, played in the national championship and are challengers for the national championship year in and year out. But talk to me about the SEC West, which has always been tough, and it seems as though the division continues to get better. We know in the next few years, Oklahoma and Texas will be joining the conference. But you look at what the job Arkansas has done over the past few seasons. You look at what Lane Kiffin is doing at Ole Miss. You look at what Texas A&M is doing. Of course, LSU will be LSU soon, very soon again. Alabama is Bama. So talk about how tough it is, even with a guy like Harsin trying to prove himself in year 2, given the fact that everyone else around him appears to be improving as well.
That is a great point you make, Caesar, because we are kind of in this, level playing field in some ways, where the teams that are now in the SEC West, your Arkansas of the world, right? That, over in the SEC East, you always talk about teams like Vanderbilt that are kind of like bottom of the barrel, and your South Carolina's bottom of the barrel. But we're starting to see the teams that, maybe didn't have that competitive edge start to rise up to the top here in the SEC West. I think that is such a valid point, and you obviously have to start at the top of that list with Alabama. The 2020 national champions obviously didn't get the job done against Georgia. Such a great game. Obviously, I think the committee got it right, got the 2 best teams out there competing. Georgia had the better hand and won the national championship. And that's the way it is. Right. And so, you look at Alabama, that what they have coming back and the guys that they've recruited and just, I think, more stability. You can only point to more stability for that Alabama football team coming into 2022. Okay. And then you look at Texas A&M, right? Looking at the off season and their recruiting. I mean, #1 recruiting class in the nation. They went out and did some serious recruiting. And I think that is going to be huge for them and obviously pay dividends. And then you mentioned Arkansas. That's a team that I love to look at as someone that is I'm a Sam Pittman fan. And, again, guys, y'all know I don't show favoritism. Okay. But I will say that I've had some experiences with Arkansas, with Sam Pittman, and just how he treats the media and how he sort of embraces his role. He is, and sitting in meetings with him, I see why Sam Pittman is someone that team wants to run through a brick wall for, right? And I think he's developed that culture there. And you saw a glimmer of it 2 years ago, or I guess I would say in 2020, right? And then in 2021, obviously just continuing to do that, making that significant improvement. And then, you're going to replace guys like Traylon Burks, but you get your quarterback and KJ Jefferson. I think that's a huge win for them. And a lot of those key pieces will be there. And I think it all starts with obviously that coaching staff and what Pittman has done. And then you go down the line, right? You talked about LSU specifically. That to me is kind of the like, what's this team going to look like? I don't know. I don't want to say Brian Kelly is going to be like the almighty resurrector over here, but, I don't think it's going to take long for LSU to get back on the map and start, really trending in that direction. And so that's just another thing you got to add. You talked about, Ole Miss, obviously what Lane Kiffin's been able to do and just continuing to lead the charge there. And then Mississippi State, they've kind of been up and down and some up and down and all around. But of course, Mike Leach obviously heading into his 3rd season now, right? He's in his 3rd season. Am I correct?
Yes.
3rd season, it all starts to run together, Mike Leach in his 3rd season. And so I think that, again, you just kind of point to all the teams that are contending in the SEC West. And there's nobody that I'm looking at saying like, oh, that's a gimme. That's a gimme. That's a gimme. There's no gimmies here, right? There are absolutely no gimmies. So then you just look at where Auburn's at and, where they rank right now and how they stack up. And I think Auburn is certainly a team that can compete and will be a team that obviously being in this league will certainly, have the opportunity to have that number beside their name every single week. Is it a single digit number? That's the hope, right? And, continue growing from there. But it's an uphill battle. And I think if you look at any team that's in this conference and in this league, and especially in the SEC West, it's going to be an uphill battle. And so to your point, 2022, year 2 for Coach Harsin is definitely going to be that an uphill battle. And it's going to take, a village to really try to move things there, at Auburn and certainly, create, again, that winning culture once again, and hopefully have an opportunity to compete for an SEC title.
Okay, Lauren. So I got to put you on the spot here. You articulated beautifully the challenges of coaching in the SEC West. But as we sit here, 6 coaches in the SEC West are in the top 20 highest paid coaches in college football. And, I think that highlights how ultra competitive just this division is that Bryan Harsin has entered. But as you and I both know, with a lot of money comes great expectations. So given how we ended the season, in your opinion, seeing it from a bird's eye view, is Bryan Harsin officially on the hot seat in 2022?
I guess at some point in time, I feel like I would love to sit down and just really create like a criteria for what the hot seat really means, right? Like what exactly is on that hot seat list? I certainly I don't know that I'd put him there yet. I realize that obviously things were not what people would hope for. But one thing I will say about Coach Harsin, and something that I learned in my time, I covered 3 Boise State games, as I mentioned before, and had opportunities to sit down and just kind of learn about how he runs things, how he sort of runs the show, and just the culture that he's developed. And a lot of people say, oh, he's a culture guy. And I think he is every bit of that. And, I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to do things, in terms of how coaches go about their business, right? And I think every coach is different. And I say this, and this is covering a multitude of teams, right? I'm out in Nebraska one week, I'm in Minnesota the next week, and the next week I'm in West Virginia, and then I'm at South Carolina, or I'm all over the map, right? And it feels to me, when you start to kind of bounce between teams and programs and schools and conferences, you learn that each school, each conference, each program has its own unique personality, and you kind of get a sense of that. And I think that when Harsin was hired at Auburn, I got a sense that the culture was going to change at Auburn, and not, I'm not saying for good or for bad, but the culture was going to change, and things were going to be handled very businesslike, and there wasn't going to be a lot of small talk and a lot of, ooh, let me put my arm around you and love you up, right? I think there's a lot of tough love involved. I think there's a lot of, instilling of confidence, but also character, and saying, okay, this is how we're going to do things. And if you don't like it, we'll see you. Bye-bye now. Okay. And I think that is certainly, kind of what I learned. But one thing I will say, and I think that in years past, that Auburn, there's been some struggles perhaps with maybe the chemistry within the team, right? Some of the team chemistry, the way the guys kind of bond, and sort of, how things are handled in the locker room. But this year, and you guys may have a different sense of it as guys, you two certainly being kind of implanted there on the Plains and sort of implanted in that program, but didn't get a sense that there was, the chemistry was off, and that there was things that were amiss. I felt like there was a high level of chemistry, and really just the character of the team, and just the want to and the fight. And yeah, it didn't always show up on the football field. Let's be real. We know that, right? I'm not saying anything that you guys don't know. It didn't always show up in the win column, but I just always felt that was a team that Auburn, that Auburn always had that fight, and sort of that gutted out that grit to them. And, I think that sometimes it doesn't always come natural and it has to be learned. And I think that starts with the culture and the person kind of leading the program. And so I think the culture is a key piece, and how you're building that culture is going to be huge. What does that look like in year 2 for Coach Harsin? I think as guys start to buy in, it's all about buying into that process. Are they buying into what he's pitching, what he's selling? Well, obviously, with the way things went with the recruiting, you would imagine that they like what he's putting down, right? And so I feel optimistic about that. And then really just obviously the culture of how things are going, but also just Auburn's obviously a place that people have come to love, and a place that they feel like they can succeed and have success and get opportunity. And I feel like that's what he's selling there at Auburn as well. And so I'm not ready to put him on the hot seat yet.
Okay.
I'm not willing to do that, but I do agree with you. The expectations are oh so high. And especially with the more that paycheck, the more the dollar bills stack up, y'all, the more the expectations are certainly there. But also, we all know that means the buyouts are also quite a bit more significant. So who can afford them? I don't know, but certainly interesting. So.
All right, Lauren, you mentioned that you've covered multiple teams around college football, pretty busy. You work with ESPN. Talk about your most memorable moment covering Auburn football.
So, as I mentioned, unfortunately, I didn't get to cover Auburn this past year, but have had a plethora of games. I guess the most recent game that I covered for them, 2020, was the Arkansas game, which I know that kind of had a controversial ending, but also a very sloppy game in which the rain was pouring down and it was like sheets of rain and the wind was blowing sideways. So that was a lot of fun. But guys, let's be real. We know where the most memorable moment in Auburn football history comes from. 2013, right?
Were you there for that? You were there for
that? Yes.
Okay.
I was there for that. But that was pre-ESPN day. So I was working for CBS 42 here in Birmingham, the local news network. And I remember specifically standing in the end zone. And of course, this was I guess the end zone, obviously, that the field goal was coming into. And I'm watching the ball fall short, right? About a yard short of the post. You see Chris Davis field it. And then at this point, like, it's a weird feeling, because you're standing around, and as media members, and you guys can relate to this, right? So, you get these opportunities to go cover national championship games. And when you've been to a couple, everyone's always talking about it. Well, at this point, I had never covered a national championship game. So working for CBS 42 in 2011, I didn't go to that national championship with Alabama. I didn't go in 2012. I had to stay home and anchor from the studio and hold down the fort, so to speak. So then I'm thinking, like, 2013, this is my opportunity to cover a national championship, right? So we're thinking, of course, Alabama wins this game. They go on, win the SEC championship. That's all she wrote. That was the thought process. Well, then all of a sudden, Chris Davis, boom, takes off running. Boo, jets are on, hits the end zone. And all we're doing is standing in the end zone. And in my mind, I'm thinking, like, I guess I'm not going to be going to cover a national championship this year. And that was like the unfortunate part, right? So it was the most exciting, exhilarating. Phone is blowing up. Oh my gosh, what just happened? Like, please tell me what just happened. But then in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, I guess we're not going out to Pasadena after all. But of course, as the story would go, Auburn ended up punching their ticket with Ohio State losing in the championship game. So it ended up all working out, and we got to go out there because we as media members, y'all, come on. So we know hospitality suites. I don't know how many of you guys have gotten to enjoy. You go to the press box, right? You go to the press box, you get to enjoy whatever spread they have there, the food. Like, that's important. Like, what spread they have. We judge on, like, the food and what's good, what's not good. And when you go to a bowl game or you go to a championship game, you're judging on the hospitality suite, right? What kind of cool arcade games do they have set up? And I got to tell you, Pasadena, to me, y'all, won the battle, because I will forever remember this. So we finished up that game, and I know Auburn obviously lost that national championship game. But I remember getting back to the hotel, and we're finishing up all our stuff. I mean, it's after 1:00, so we're done. We're off the air. It's time to pack it up, pack it in. And we walk into the hospitality suite, hoping to grab a snack, a drink, something, whatever. And they had a bacon bar, y'all.
Ooh.
A bacon bar that
Sounds
had
dangerous.
at least 6 to 8 different types of bacon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, literally the whole place smelled of bacon, but I don't know about you guys, but I love me some bacon. Extra crispy bacon. But my favorite bacon is candied bacon. And I know I'm going off on a tangent here. Got to get on the soapbox. But candied bacon is my absolute favorite. And they had some phenomenal candied bacon. So that was a very memorable experience for me, not only because of the kick six, but also the bacon bar that was to follow.
Well, that's it for another great edition of Building Rapport. I want to take some time to thank Lauren Sisler for joining us. Lauren, we appreciate you giving us your perspective on all things college football and Auburn football.
I appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, as always, we are the War Rapport. If you want more segments like this, hit that subscribe button for us. We are the War Rapport on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TW Rapport on TikTok. Guys, we're signing off. And as always, War Eagle.
War